welcome to Above Replacement Radio. I am your host, Chris Gianta. You know what Christy Mathewson wasn't worried about? SIERA. When you're thinking about Pedro Ciriaco, I mean, the only one that can compete is maybe Hannes Wagner's 1908 season. Over there on the other side of the screen is Daniel Curran.
Like, if we just clip together every time we've talked about him on other people's profiles, we've done a Mickey Cochran episode.
I can't get past Rabbit Marinville. It's not necessarily Hall of Fame. It's not necessarily above average, but we can guarantee you we are better than just the standard replacement level college sophomore.
And welcome to Above Replacement Radio, where we're talking baseball kind of whenever, truly. We're talking baseball kind of whenever. I'm your host, Chris Gianta. Over there on the other side of the screen is Daniel Curran. How you doing, Daniel?
Chris, I'm doing well today. We are over a month into the lockout now. Nothing has happened. And I mean, literally nothing has happened. There are no negotiations going on. It is now 6 days into the new year when we were told negotiations were going to start up again. It hasn't happened. So my prediction was that it was going to go till March. Yeah, I feel like that is looking a little more realistic than it might have earlier.
Yeah, it is. I mean, one of the benefits of the lockout is it makes, like, when my friends, and I'm sure like when your friends like ask you about, when do you think the lockout's gonna end? And like when I told my friends I don't think it's gonna end by spring training, they were like, what? No way.
Yeah.
Now
we look smart, but for what price?
Better. Yeah. It reminds us of the last time we didn't really have anything to talk about, which was, when the pandemic was at its peak and canceling.
Like right now?
Right now. Yeah, both kind of similar scenarios here, except the pandemic is not the reason why there's no action in the MLB. It's the lockout. But when the lockdowns were at its peak, and
that's the correct way of putting it.
When there's nothing going on in Major League Baseball, and actually our first ever episode on iTunes and YouTube and or I guess Apple Podcasts instead of iTunes, but Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube is best baseball statistics to use. But it's been like
almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years, about 20 months.
Like 21 months. Yeah, 21 months.
21 months since that episode
we've
came
evolved.
out. Yeah, we've definitely evolved. That was episode 30 of this episode, or of this podcast. This is episode 169, and I think the history series and covering baseball for 2 seasons now, even if they weren't completely full. We've definitely learned way more than we knew at the time, and we figured we'd remaster this thing because there's nothing else going on, and it'll actually provide a good reference for if anyone is unaware of what we're talking about. This is our reference point, and I feel like we won't have to, like, I don't think we'll have to do this episode again, because I think we got it pretty covered down pat.
I would hope so, yeah. Unless there's more saber matchers that come out in the next 5 years. If we do it again, it'll be far down the line. It won't be in 20 months.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's always new stuff popping up. Like, I know in the past year they've created championship win probability added, and RBAT plus and wOBA, which we're not going to get into today because they're not crazy popular. But yeah, there's a ton of statistics that when we were things that we would reference every episode during the season, talking about our players to highlight, guys who are doing good, guys who are doing bad, and what we've referenced in the off season, why this guy's good, why this guy's bad, why this guy's overrated, why this guy's underrated, all of that stuff. And we're gonna make it all clear, or at least attempt to make it all clear in this episode. And at the end, we're gonna talk about some news. Ken Rosenthal got fired, and fired from MLB Network, and Kyle Seager retired from baseball. It was funny though, because with the Kyle Seager retirement, the wife announced it, and
Yep.
for a second, since I only saw like what was it, Julie Seager or something?
Yeah.
Since I only saw Julie Seager, I was like, is Corey Seager retiring? And then I was like, oh wait, no,
There's
it's
another
Kyle.
one.
It's the other one.
Funny because his Players Weekend nickname was literally Corey's brother.
Yeah.
You played right along with the joke without even realizing it.
Right. Yeah. Fell into the trap.
Corey Seager left $325 million on the table. Wow.
Yeah. This is quite the decision here by Corey Seager. But yeah, with these statistics, we will start off by covering the basics because sometimes they're not well known by everybody.
Yeah. So we're gonna start out with the quadruple slash line. That is batting average, on base percentage, slugging percentage, OPS. The way that we usually present it is in a form where we say he is slashing, and then we list off 4 numbers in a row. Usually, most of them preceded by decimal points. For example, Barry Bonds' career slash line is 298, 444, 607, 1051. When we say that, we're referring to batting average, on base percentage, slugging percentage, OPS in that order. Batting average is the percent of hits per at bats. Pretty standard. It's I'd say the most standard rate stat, possibly in sports.
Right.
Yeah. On base percentage is essentially the amount of plate appearances, which are different from at bats, where you reach base, whether it's via hit, walk, or hit by pitch, not by sac bunt. They don't count because you're sacrificing yourself. You're giving yourself up. Same with sac flies, I believe. They don't count as plate appearances, but they count as at bats, right?
Yeah. Wait. Sac
bunts, sac flies.
Sac bunts don't count as a plate appearance or an at bat. I learned this very recently. I assumed they were a plate appearance. Sac flies count as a plate appearance, but not an at bat.
Okay, that's very weird. But
it is. It's weird. And you can tell that this rule was made a very long time ago because of how they value sac bunts.
Let me just say, I think we should just go over the difference between plate appearances and at bats because they are it's not in the script, but I think it is important. Plate appearances is simply how many times you go to the plate. At bats is how many times a plate appearance ends in something that can be controlled by the hitter. So essentially, if you draw a walk, if you're a hitter, you got 4 pitches that you couldn't hit. That's not, it's not fair to go against your batting average, so it counts as a plate appearance instead. Same with hit by pitch. You got a pitch that was so bad it hit you. There's nothing you can do there. You can't expect to get a hit on a pitch that hits you. You can't expect to get a hit on a pitch that's out of the strike zone. So that's where the difference between plate appearances and at bats comes in. Usually, plate appearances is used as a what's the word I'm looking for here, Chris? As like a
qualifier.
A qualifier, yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
because it's just total.
Yeah, so for rate statistics, if you want to find out the leader in at least like on base percentage, slugging, and OPS, you need to have 3.1 plate appearances per team game played, which in a 162 game season usually ends up being 502 plate appearances. And we can get into the second half or the last 3 of the quadruple slash line.
Yeah. So slugging percentage is total bases divided by at bats. That one does not use plate appearances as a qualifier. That one is all at bats, meaning plate appearances in which the result is determined by a hitter. And also, one thing that is important to note is that total bases can only be collected through hits. Walks do not count as total bases. Hit by pitches do not count as total bases. Also, anytime if you hit a single and then steal second base, that still only counts as 1 total base. You don't get extra bases based on how far you get after your plate appearance ends. So it's total bases is 1 for a single, 2 for a double, 3 for a triple, 4 for a home run. Extremely basic. All that divided by at bats, and that's your slugging percentage. It measures how well you're driving the ball, how well you're mixing in extra base hits, because a double is better than a single. A home run is better than everything else. And then OPS literally stands for on base plus slugging. It is the sum of on base percentage and slugging. So OPS, it's a good stat. It's better than batting average because it combines how well you're getting on base with how well you're driving the ball, which are two very important components of hitting. And anyone who can do both is going to be looked at as a very strong hitter. And then on base percentage, obviously, if you've ever seen Moneyball, you know why that is better than average because walks. Yeah, they don't guarantee any further movement on the bases, but it runs up the pitch count. It's good for plate discipline, and it's a free pass. I mean, walks are literally free passes, and slugging percentage we went over. Um, so on base percentage, slugging, OPS, those are the three important ones. Batting average. A lot of people say it doesn't matter, which is true to a degree, but situational batting average does matter. If you're ever going to look at batting average in a situation, it should be, depending on what kind of situation the hitter is inheriting. So batting average on runners in scoring position, I think, is the best uh, teller of high leverage situations. RBI is usually used in that context because it's like, oh, he drove in 121 runs. That means he's good when it matters most. Well, actually, the best way to determine that is batting average with the runners on scoring position. It shows how much they're getting a hit when they need to. So that is the best time to use batting average, and that is also the best way to tell situational hitting.
Yeah, very correct. And like average can also be used with like how a guy does against certain pitches, which is more like that's more like analytical. It doesn't really contribute to the overall thing, but it's like, oh, this guy made an improvement this year. Last year he hit 250 on fastballs. This year he's hitting 350, along with slugging percentage, because it's not like you can really evaluate on base percentage on a certain pitch because it's
a lot of it is out of control.
Yeah, a lot of that is out of control, and you like walking on a fastball is the same as walking on a curveball. That doesn't really have to do with necessarily how
I
you're.
suppose there could be a couple outliers there, but
Potentially,
generally
yeah.
speaking, I mean, Juan Soto probably just walks really well on everything.
True, and also the problem is like I don't think it's provided on like Baseball Savant how a guy is performing with on base percentage on a certain pitch, so it's not like we can really even look at that particularly.
Well, yeah, because that's all batted ball data. Walks don't count as batted balls.
Yeah, we can only look at average slugging, wOBA, and the expected
Those are the
versions
main
of
three.
those statistics.
So
to show why average or OPS would be a better evaluator than OPS, it's better to look at team data and how teams perform based on their OPS versus their average. So if you're looking here, we have two graphs, and it shows how it both have runs in them, and obviously scoring runs is the name of offense. So if you look at OPS, teams with a higher OPS tend to correlate more having having higher run production. If you can see here what I'm circling on YouTube for the YouTube viewers, the R squared for OPS versus runs is 0.857. For those unaware of like correlation graphs, it's kind of simple. The further away it is from 0, the more it is a correlation, and the closer it is to 1, the more of it is being a positive correlation. So for OPS, the correlation or the R squared is 0.857. For average versus runs, batting average versus runs, it is 0.592. That is a very major difference. That was 2021 American League teams. I chose American League teams because they have DHs, and I think the run production is a little more accurate to how baseball is currently, and how it will be, considering there's probably not going to be any more pitchers hitting in the future. But that's basically that's team data. It's hard to evaluate. It's hard to measure that based off of player data because you can't score a run by yourself unless you're hitting a home run. But team data, it shows that clearly there's better run production with higher OPSs than better run production with higher batting averages. But they both positively correlate, but OPS definitely has a significantly better correlation with runs than for batting average. So that's kind of the comparison of the two. And then with RBI, we kind of briefly discussed it.
Yeah, we did. I think, like the classic example of RBI is Jose Abreu. He's a guy that racks up RBIs every single year. And 2021 in particular, he was hitting behind Tim Anderson. He's been hitting behind Tim Anderson for years, who's one of the best just pure hitters in the game. And then Eloy Jimenez, Luis Robert, guys like that have hit ahead of him in the past. So he gets a lot of opportunities to drive in runs, being that he's a 3-hitter with some good hitters ahead of him that get on base a lot. The best way to determine it is how well they do with the situations they got, not just who has the most situations. Because since Jose Abreu gets the most situations, he's usually going to have the most RBI because he has the most opportunity. When you look at average with runners in scoring position, that's a better teller of how people perform in leverage situations with guys on base, because it's how often rather than how much. I think that's a big theme of how we view statistics. It's how often over how much.
Correct, absolutely. And then a guy can have a lot less situations and be playing a lot less games, but then we just look at overall plate appearances and be like, oh well, this guy's in the lineup more, so maybe the rate isn't as much of a factor because he has a smaller sample size. But yeah, like a guy with similar amount of plate appearances, you kind of have to look at the rate stuff, obviously, instead of the count statistics such as RBI. And yeah, I'm looking at someone like I don't have to look at this guy because I do have another different example of how to evaluate offensive players. So I guess the most traditional form of evaluating offensive players is average home runs, RBI, and kind of determining how good a player is off of that. That's definitely gone away more. If you look at like the Chiron of the player, which is basically like when a player comes up, they have like their number, name, position, and then their stats. They will always have like average home runs and RBI, but they've added some more, like they've added on base percentage, on OPS and things of that nature. And like, more advanced broadcasts like the White Sox broadcast or, the ESPN StatCast broadcast, they add a bunch of other cooler stuff that we're going to be talking about. But average home runs, RBI, that's kind of what I grew up to know, but now I know that maybe it's not the best way to evaluate offensive players. So the example I'll use is based on 2021, Salvador Perez versus Shohei Ohtani. So Salvador Perez, he hit 273 with 48 home runs and 121 RBI. Ohtani hit 257 with 46 home runs and 100 RBI. So based off of that, if you just looked at those numbers, you would think, Salvador Perez had a better offensive year than Shohei Ohtani. And we're just looking strictly at offense. We're not looking at Ohtani's pitching at all here. But despite this, even though Salvador Perez had a higher average home runs and RBI than Shohei Ohtani, I think we would both agree Ohtani still had a much better offensive season. So to break it down, also Perez had 665 plate appearances and Ohtani had 639. So this is very comparable. So the count statistics are comparable.
They're in the same ballpark.
Same ballpark. Count statistics and rate statistics very comparable here. So Ohtani had 96 walks compared to Perez's 28. And Ohtani had a 372 on base percentage compared to Perez's 316. I think we've been pronouncing Perez wrong for forever, but I'm still probably just going to say Perez because it's easier for now.
Like people are still out there saying Wander Franco.
Yeah, true. Probably
Franco.
me. I think I was mostly.
I was. I learned to fix it up
Yeah.
eventually.
Um.
I mean, hey,
So,
Chris, you got time. He's 21.
yeah. I'll figure it out by the end of his contract. Um. So Ohtani. So Ohtani had 96 walks. Perez had 28. Ohtani had a 372 on base percentage. Perez had 316. So even though Perez's average batting average was higher, Ohtani was still much more effective at getting on base, which is, the name of the game. And we'll get into like Ohtani pushing runners over and things of that nature, and how effective he was with runners in scoring position, because we know that walks don't move guys around, but Ohtani was still kind of more effective. Also, Ohtani had more extra base hits, 80 to 72, due to him having more doubles and triples. Perez had more home runs, but Ohtani still had more extra base hits. And also, Ohtani had a pretty significantly higher slugging percentage, with a 592 slugging percentage compared to Perez's 544 slugging percentage. And then with runners in scoring position, Ohtani had higher numbers in the entire quadruple slash line, with runners in scoring position. So even though Perez had more RBI, Ohtani was better with runners in scoring position. It's just that Perez had more opportunities. In fact, Perez had 45% more at bats with runners in scoring position than Shohei Ohtani, giving him, more opportunities to drive runs in, which is why he ended up driving more guys in. And a lot of why Ohtani wasn't able to drive in as many runs as Perez was kind of out of his control, because even when Ohtani was up with runners in scoring position, 13% of those plate appearances with runners in scoring position were intentional walks. So not even things where like he could have swung at something out of the zone. It was literally like he went up to the plate and the manager put up four fingers, and then he had to go to first base. So he definitely could not drive any runners in, unless the bases were loaded, of course, which in none of those situations they were. So 13% of Ohtani's plate appearances with runners in scoring position were intentional walks. Only 2% of such plate appearances for Perez were intentional walks. So, despite Perez having the higher numbers in those traditional marks, we can see based on percentages and, even looking at percentage statistics with runners in scoring position, Ohtani was definitely way better. He had a 965 OPS. Perez had an 859 OPS. There was over a 100-point difference there. So it's like you can't be looking at just average home runs, RBI, because there's a lot more to look at. Guys getting on base more and having a better time getting bases per at bat, which Ohtani was better in both those categories. And that's a more extreme example, but it had to be shared. All right. So those are the basics of position players. The basics of pitching, it's not as unless you're going for pitcher wins, I think the pitcher evaluations is a little less misunderstood than with position player evaluation.
Yeah, pitcher wins. I think this is pretty well known at this point. I don't think there's a lot of people really trying to combat this at this point, but pitcher wins are very obsolete. There's a lot that pitchers just can't control with getting the win. First of all, if you don't have the lead, you could pitch 7 shutout innings and not get the win, whether it's because your team doesn't score, or your bullpen comes in and gives up the lead. There are so much things that can happen that, there are so many perfect examples of pitching really well but not getting the win. And subsequently, you could pitch 5 innings and give up 6 earned runs, and if your team does really well, you could still get the win. And there's a lot of just perfect examples of that. So pitcher wins, it's very obsolete. You should never use it. Like, RBI and batting average, we can find situations. You should just never use pitcher wins.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the best example is Jacob deGrom in 2018.
Yep.
I think he led the league in quality starts. I think he finished the year with like 28 consecutive quality starts and was
like
10-9.
most of the time, if you win a lot of games, you probably were also really good in every other situation. Like 20 win seasons don't happen on accident. If you're a 20 game winner, you probably are good at a lot of other things that aren't wins
Right.
that
Yeah.
have much more value.
Yeah, exactly. Like Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole both won 20 games in 2019. They both had excellent years.
And they both played it for a 107 win team.
Yeah, yeah. And Julio Urias this year, he he went 20-3. I mean, not necessarily an excellent year, but a
But
very, very good year, and on a very, very good team. And he had
on a
like
106 win team, yeah. That also
some
gave him, yeah, a
some of the
lot of
highest
run
run
support.
support.
Yeah. So ERA is the main pitching stat. It's the main rate stat. It's earned runs allowed per 9 innings, obviously. This is also kind of being seen as obsolete. I wouldn't really say to the same degree as batting average. The other the basic replacement for it is RA9, which is runs allowed per 9. The only difference is that it's unearned runs per 9 innings rather than earned runs. Unearned runs can be allowed because of defensive errors, because of inherited runners, things of that nature. Baseball Reference actually recently added a separate RI9 for extra innings because that's a lot more inherited runners that pitchers are getting put in. Those situations where there's a runner on second that
Yeah,
eventually can come around to score on literally nothing. You could give up 2 ground balls and give up a run
exactly.
to
Yeah,
start an inning. That's kind of the other. We'll get to the real replacements for ERA later, but the one basic one is RA9, which is just discounting unearned runs.
yeah. RA9 is all the runs you allow, and I
Yeah.
think the basic idea of if you go RA9 instead of ERA, it's I'm leaning more into it as over time because we agree that fielding percentage is not the best evaluator of
Errors
def-
are incredibly, incredibly subjective.
yeah, and the basic example I can think of is like you put like Adam Dunn in center field, you put Byron Buxton in center field. So say there's a ball 90 feet to the center fielder's left. Byron Buxton can get there and drop the ball and commit an error. Adam Dunn cannot get there, and that is a hit.
The perfect example is Fernando Tatis Jr. last year. People pointed out that he made a lot of errors at shortstop. If you look at the errors he made, a lot of them were on plays that most shortstops wouldn't have even attempted.
Exactly. So then you put that into pitcher evaluation, and it's maybe the earned runs or unearned runs allowed are not necessarily based on like the defensive performance behind them. And that's why I'm kind of leaning into it more because you can have a bad defense behind you with a good fielding percentage, certainly. So the there's or maybe not necessarily correlating with their fielding percentage, and vice versa. So you know with errors, it may not necessarily uh it may not necessarily evaluate a pitcher's performance as well, like ERA. But usually ERA and RA9, there's a very, very close correlation there. So
Mhm.
it's not like someone can lead the league in ERA and be like 12th in RA9.
Yeah.
That's usually not going to
I
be the
think that
case.
I think the reason why, one of the reasons why RA9 isn't necessarily mainstream, and there's many, but one that comes to mind for me is that just the underwhelming factor that a pitcher's RA9 can never be less than their ERA.
True, exactly. Yeah,
It's always going to be more.
yeah.
It's always going to make a pitcher look worse. It's like, well, yeah, his ERA is 3.28, but you look at this, it's actually 3.72.
Yeah, it's like way harder to have a sub 2 RA9.
Yeah, it's nearly impossible.
Yeah. So I mean like in terms of marketing, it's way easier to market a guy with a 1.7 ERA than like a 2.1 RA9.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think RA9 is gonna replace ERA anytime
No.
soon. But I'm definitely not against ERA. I'll definitely reference it forever. Um, and we'll get more into the pitcher statistics later. And now since we've covered the basics, it's time to dig a little deeper. Um, and we'll start with everyone's favorite word, BABIP, batting average on balls in play.
Our favorite
Um,
word.
It's fantastic.
The only
But
stat that we use as a verb.
yes,
Not the only one, but the main one.
the main one. The one we used it as like an actual thing. The other is mostly jokes, but you can get BABIP in real life. And we're gonna talk about batting average on balls in play. So batting average on balls in play is batting average on non-home runs and non-strikeouts. So basically it is anything that can be affected by the fielders. You hit a double that can be affected by a fielder. You hit a ground ball to short, obviously that's going to be affected by the fielder. You hit a blooper that can be affected by fielders.
You hit a fly ball in foul territory that's caught, that is affected by a fielder. But if it
Exactly.
lands, not affected by a fielder.
Correct. So BABIP is a stat used to measure pitchers and batters' luck. So it's BABIP for batters, BABIP against for pitchers. The league average BABIP has been between 292 and 300 for the last 14 years. So it's, so a batter well below that range. So a batter, if a batter were to have a 240 BABIP, he would be considered to have very bad luck because he's well below the 292 to 300 range. A batter well above that range is considered to have good luck. So a batter with a 350 BABIP is considered to have good luck. And it is exactly the opposite with pitchers. So if you have a 240 BABIP against, you're considered to have very good luck. If you have a 360, I believe 3 BABIP against, like Eduardo Rodriguez did last year, that is considered to have very bad luck, which is why I was talking about him endlessly last year. And sometimes I will say, sometimes it is not completely luck. Like, I believe like guys like Rod Carew and Tony Gwynn had BABIPs around, like career BABIPs around 340 because of, they had great bat control, great ability to get hits not via the homer. And it was something that was obviously long standing, and you can't, as they say in Fever Pitch, you can't have a lucky career. So that's not really considered luck to have, a career 340 BABIP over, 10,000 plate appearances or whatever.
I think if you want to make a modern example to that, the perfect one would be Tim Anderson.
Yeah.
He's a guy who he hit 338 in 2019. He's consistently hit above that mark or around it for the last couple of years, and he's not necessarily a power guy. So he's had a BABIP north of probably 320 each of the last, probably much more than that each of the last at least 3 seasons.
I think last year's BABIP was like 370 or something like that.
Just going year by year since 2019, 399, 383, 372. His career is 353. Over almost 3,000 plate appearances.
Yeah, that's not exactly luck. And I think BABIP for pitch, or BABIP against for pitchers, can be used more for luck than BABIP for hitters, because a hitter, you can have a certain archetype of how you approach things, and also faster players are more likely to have higher BABIPs because they can leg out infield hits and things of that nature. I imagine, or actually I should look up Ichiro's BABIP over his years, because
Ichiro's a good one.
He had to be the king of infield hits, obviously.
Well, yeah. I mean, his BABIP just on, like, I know that we don't have StatCast for him, but I bet his BABIP on, like, soft hit balls was pretty strong. He had a career BABIP of 338 over a 19-year career. Nonetheless, it also started at age 27, when he probably wasn't at his peak athleticism. Yeah,
his first 10 years of his career, his BABIP was 357. Over 7,000 plate appearances.
From age 36 on, it was 307.
Yeah, so that's not necessarily luck. But if a pitcher were to have like a career, a pitcher is much less likely to have like a 340 career BABIP against, unless they have the worst defense every single year, in which case they should get out of there in free agency. But yeah, like a pitcher, I feel like pitcher BABIP against is referenced a lot more than position player BABIP like for them. And yeah, and sometimes I can accept like a low BABIP against if you're a very soft contact pitcher like Kyle Hendricks earlier in his career, maybe not last year, but earlier in his career. But he also, kind of relied on his Gold Glove defense behind him, so maybe not as much. But yeah, BABIP, it's I would say it's more simple. It's just like if you're a batter with a 240 BABIP, probably bad luck. If you're a batter with a 350 BABIP, pretty good luck, and vice versa for the most part. I would say, yeah, sometimes it's not completely luck, but more often than not, it is luck. Usually it's explained by that. All right. So with BABIP, we can now go into pitcher peripherals, which are fascinating.
Yeah, so pitcher peripherals, for those of you who don't know, is an evaluation of how well a pitcher is in the things that they can control. So the main one is fielding independent pitching, otherwise known as FIP, where the Fangraphs definition, it measures what a player's ERA would look like over a given period of time if the pitcher were to have experienced league average results on balls in play and league average timing. So it is based on the 3 true outcomes of baseball: a pitcher's strikeout rate, walk rate, and home run rate. Obviously, if you're giving up a home run, that's entirely on you, the pitcher. If you're striking out a guy, that's entirely on you, the pitcher. If you're walking a guy, that's entirely on you, the pitcher.
Yeah, none of it can be affected by the fielders. Also,
essentially
a home run can't be affected by your defense. So, you're not
that
giving up a lot of home runs because you have a bad defense.
Yes. So that BABIP block we just talked about, it goes completely out the window with FIP. Corbin Burnes just had a generational type season. He had a league-leading 2.43 ERA last year, but his FIP was what made him stand out. He led the league in strikeouts per 9. He led in K to walk ratio. He led in home runs per 9, and he had a 1.63 FIP, which was the second lowest FIP in the live ball era, which was the last 100 years, and that's minimum 120 innings pitched. The only season better than him was Pedro's. Was it his 99 or his 2000?
I believe 99.
Okay, it was one of those two. I think it was his 99. But so what you may not have realized was that there was a big gap between his ERA and his FIP, and that's because Corbin Burnes had a 436 BABIP against with runners in scoring position. That obviously allows for a lot more runners to score, and that inflates his ERA or a lot higher than what it would look like otherwise. I think one big misunderstanding about FIP is that people talk about how it's like it doesn't measure what happened on the field, but it does. Every single input in FIP is what happened on the field, which is a very important distinction that a lot of people don't make with the reality of it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, FIP. I mostly like. I think it's pretty accurate, and I think it correlates a lot with like expected ERA, which I usually go with more. Because Corbin Burnes had a significantly lower FIP than his ERA, and he also had a significantly lower expected ERA than his ERA. So usually there's a pretty good correlation because StatCast also or expected ERA also considers the strikeouts and walks a lot.
Right.
Mostly they just have the batted ball data of like what's expected to happen on the batted balls. So yeah, and expected ERA is something I definitely use a little more than FIP. It uses StatCast data to determine. So StatCast data determines expected wOBA. We'll get into wOBA later, and that determines what their ERA is expected to be based off strikeout rate, walk rate, and batted ball data from StatCast. And it doesn't necessarily consider like situational pitching. So if you're much better at pitching with runners in scoring position, like maybe Blake Snell in 2020, it doesn't really consider that. It just goes based off of like the how each batter is performing against you, no matter the situation, and creating an expected ERA based off that, and also uses the quality of contact from StatCast. So like, if you go on Baseball Savant, you you can see like a ball. So let's say a ball gets hit, 100 miles per hour at a, 26-degree launch angle to dead center field, and it's, caught like a leaping grab, crazy thing that happened. Maybe it has an expected batting average of like 700. That is going to go against your expected wOBA against, or expected ERA against. But, obviously with ERA and also FIP, it doesn't necessarily matter. FIP, or I guess ERA, it would benefit more. FIP is like, that's a ball in play, so it doesn't really matter. But the expected ERA considers, the quality of contact against you. FIP, it can't do that because it doesn't involve StatCast. All right, so now on to xFIP, which is an expected statistic within an expected statistic. It's pretty fun.
Well, it's like Inception.
Yeah.
So the thing with xFIP is that the Fangraphs definition is that it's calculated the same way as FIP, except it replaces a pitcher's home run total with the estimate of how many home runs they should have allowed given the number of fly balls surrendered, while assuming a league average home run to fly ball percentage. So this is a stat that I would be a little careful with, because I think the only correct way of using it is to suggest a pitcher should be better because they're allowing a lot of home runs. But even then, I think there is a lot more to be taken into consideration. But for example, Corbin Burns, he gave up, I think, like 6 home runs all year. It's not really fair for him to say that, well, he should have been worse because he should have given up more home runs.
Right.
Because that's something that a pitcher controls, and it's sort of like, well, you should have, they should have controlled this better, but not everyone can. Just to give some exact numbers to it, Corbin Burns had the lowest home run to fly ball ratio among the 39 qualifiers in 2021, and he had a 230 xFIP compared to his 163 FIP. I just want to look at some StatCast data right now. I want to see what percent of the league's home runs were like down the middle, because that's like, if you're throwing a pitch down the middle and giving up a home run, like, I don't think it's fair to be like, well, they shouldn't have given
Yeah.
up a home run.
Yeah. xFIP is, and especially with the Corbin Burns example, I don't think it's fair because like Corbin Burns had one of the most elite exit velocities against. He wasn't giving up hard hit balls. He wasn't giving up barrels either.
Yep.
So whatever fly balls he was giving up, I believe, were also like, low exit velocity. I didn't prepare what like where he ranks in like average exit velocity against on fly balls, but yeah, it implies that like all fly balls are created equal, which they're not, because of the home run to fly ball ratio aspect. But I mean, I think the best area to use xFIP for is if a guy is
Gives up a lot of home runs.
If a guy is in a crazy pitcher ballpark or a crazy hitter ballpark. So like a Yankees pitcher is giving up home runs left and right. Maybe that's not going to be the scenario if he's on another team. Same if it's like if you're a Giants pitcher and you're not giving up any home runs, you're probably going to give up more if you're at an average stadium.
The classic example of xFIP from the 2021 season was Andrew Heaney,
Exactly.
who pitched for both the Angels and the Yankees, which I believe I know Yankee Stadium was definitely a hitter-friendly ballpark, and given the Angels pitching, Angel Stadium might have been as well. But he had a 5.83 ERA, a 4.85 FIP, but a 4.12 xFIP because he had a home run to fly ball ratio of 18.1%, which was about 4.5% above the league average, which was, I think, 13.7 last year. I just want to go back to the point I made before. 25% of all home runs given up in 2021 were in StatCast's Game Day Zone 5, which means it's right down the middle.
Middle, yeah.
Which, if you're throwing pitches down the middle, like, I'm not gonna be like, well, you shouldn't have given up that many home runs, because that's you reap what you sow.
Right, exactly.
But xFIP, it's good to suggest, like Chris mentioned, if a guy's in a non-favorable ballpark, or if a guy, if you look more into the home run data, if some of them are, if they're wall scraper home runs, or if it's good pieces of pitching getting hit. But it's definitely one I would be careful with, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think I would ever make a case of like pitcher A is better than pitcher B because pitcher A gives up home runs on 20% of his fly balls.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Unless I had more data to back that up, but that wouldn't be my main argument.
Right. Yeah. It also, like, xFIP is another thing that ignores like how hard like a fly balls are being given
Mhm.
up against a certain guy. And I'm trying to look for Corbin. Dang,
It
it's
kind of
hard.
it assumes that every pitcher should give up a home run on 13% of their fly balls.
Yeah, I'm last thing I'll look at for the Corbin Burns thing. He's mentioned a lot because of the, peripherals and stuff.
Because he had a peripheral anomaly this season.
Yeah, I mean, second best in the live ball era, minimum 120 pitches is pretty wild.
Innings pitched.
Uh,
Minimum 120 total pitches thrown all
one
season.
minimum 120 innings pitched.
Yeah, one of 10,000 examples.
Okay, this is actually pretty crazy. I just looked it up.
Okay.
So there were 128 pitchers to have there were 128 pitchers to have 300 batted balls against last in 2021, and Corbin Burns's average exit velocity against on fly balls among those pitchers is the lowest. So that's why his home run to fly ball ratio was so low, because he had the softest hit fly balls out of anyone qualifying. So sometimes, yeah, a lot of the times xFIP, you can kind of disregard it. But it is on the Fangraphs dashboard.
Don't completely put it away though, I would say.
Yeah. Don't put it away, but don't completely rely on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now we're going to get into, I call it SIERA. A lot of people call it SIERA. They call it by its name. I call it SIERA, and you can do whatever you want. The Fangraphs definition is that while FIP and xFIP largely ignore fly balls, they focus on strikeouts, walks, and home runs. Instead, SIERA completely adds in complexity in an attempt to more accurately model what makes a pitcher successful. SIERA doesn't ignore balls in play, but attempts to explain why certain pitchers are more successful at limiting hits and preventing runs. I'm going to make that extremely less complicated to people like Chris who don't really understand it. Chris, that's not a shot at you. You literally wrote in the script. Honestly, doesn't make much sense to Chris. It is strikeout to walk ratio and ground balls. Those are the two main components. Home runs are completely disregarded, which I think that's probably the main flaw of the stat, is that it assumes that pitchers aren't giving up home runs. They are, some much more than others. But if you're looking at if you're trying to make sense of the SIERA leaderboards, it's guys who strike out a lot of batters, walk very few batters, and give up a lot of ground balls. So I'm just going to go through the leaderboard and highlight some of the important parts of it. So I'm looking at the 79 pitchers who threw at least 130 innings in 2021. Corbin Burns had the lowest SIERA at a 2.61 because he had a 30.4% strikeout rate minus walk rate, and he had the 17th highest ground ball rate at 48.8%. He excelled in both of those aspects, and therefore he led. Where it starts to get tricky is Max Scherzer. Max Scherzer had a 28.9% strikeout to walk ratio, which was the second highest in the league, but his ground ball rate, I believe, was one of the lowest. Just checking. Yeah, it was 72nd among the 79 pitchers. The reason why he ranked second in SIERA was because of the K to walk ratio. It was the second highest in the league, and therefore, with that sort of volume, that's why. So I think based on Scherzer, you can probably infer that a lot more emphasis is put on the strikeouts and walks rather than the ground balls. And then, you go up and down the line, Garrett Cole, Carlos Rodon, and then Logan Webb at number 5 is one of the more interesting ones. So the 4 people ahead of him have a K rate minus walk rate above 27.8%, and then Webb is 5th at 20.5%. And that's because he had a 60.9% ground ball rate, which was second in the league. And that's substantial. That is a lot. That is, the reason he's 5th is because it's that high. And then after that, you have Zach Wheeler, Robbie Ray, guys who are pretty much good at both. And there's a couple of, I think one of the better. I'll talk about some outliers. Charlie Morton was another good one. Everyone's everyone around him is like low 20s, 24 to 22. And he's at 20.9%, and that is because Charlie Morton had a very good ground ball rate as well. He had he had the 22nd best on that list of 79. And then the other big highlight, if you look at the top 29 in SIERA from this season, everyone has a K rate minus walk rate of at least 17.5%, and that is still above average. The person with 17.5 is Max Fried. Would you say, Chris, that Max Fried is above average in strikeout totals and walk prevention?
Yeah,
absolutely. The league average was around 14%. His was 17%. At number 30, you have Framber Valdez at 11.7%, significantly below the average. But Chris, if there's one thing we know about Framber Valdez, is that he is the ground ball god. 70.3%, almost 10% higher than anybody else on the list. I can't explain it. I don't know how a pitcher gets a ground ball on 70% of batted balls in a year. That is absolutely insane. That's why Framber Valdez cracks the top 30 in SIERA. That is my example, and that's, I think if there's a flaw with it, I'd say it's that it assumes people aren't giving up home runs, or it doesn't take into account home runs, because that's obviously a very significant part of pitching. That's why Garrett Cole ranks just behind Max Scherzer, even though that's why Garrett Cole ranks third, despite 1.19 home runs per nine. Rather than he's just ahead of Carlos Rodon, who gave up 0.88 home runs per nine. And that's that. That is SIERA or SIERA, whichever one you want to call it by.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense now, looking at the leaderboards and such. Yeah, that's so those are all the pitcher peripherals we mostly look at. The peripherals I mostly look at are FIP and expected ERA. And I think that's kind of mostly universal. Skill, also SIERA stands for skill interactive earned run average.
Yep.
So if you don't know what the SI meant, and
also the reason why ground balls are favorable by that stat is because ground balls generally produce less damage than fly balls. I actually recently wrote about Josh Bell, who had substantially high ground ball rates considering his power. And one thing I talked about was that in 2021, the league average on ground balls was 236, and on fly balls it was 237. So, near identical in batting average, but the big difference is in slugging percentage, because a lot of fly balls end up being home runs, and a lot of ground balls end up being, if they're a hit, singles, maybe doubles, even maybe triples. But that's like extremely rare.
Right, exactly.
So that's why ground balls are favorable, is because they give up less total bases.
Yeah, I'm looking at fly balls in 2021 generated an 877 slugging percentage according to StatCast or Baseball Savant. So that means 0.877 bases per at bat on fly balls.
That's a lot.
Ground balls
that would more than lead the league. That would be best all time.
Yeah,
that was a full season.
And ground balls lead to a slugging percentage of 266.
That is a substantial. Like, the difference between those two would be an MVP season.
877 minus 877 877 minus 266 is a 611 slugging, which is that wins you MVP.
That's MVP caliber.
Yeah, Ohtani was 592.
I think Vlad's was right around there.
Yeah, Vlad's was a little higher, but it
was like 604 or 602, I think.
Yeah, obviously he didn't pitch, but he led the league and he led the AL in slugging, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, those are the pitcher peripherals. So now we get into plus stats, which are honestly kind of basic. Easy to explain. OPS plus is the first one we'll go over, which is the easiest of the plus stats probably to explain. It is a league and park adjusted statistic that sets the league average for position players at 100 and this is based completely on OPS. So like it's where your OPS compares to the rest of the league on the scale of park adjusted stat. And this is used completely on Baseball Reference. This is not on Fangraphs. Also, so the amount of points over or under 100 a player is the percentage above or below league average they are. And this applies for all plus statistics. So a 150 OPS plus is 50% above league average. This applies for ERA plus and weighted runs created plus, which we'll go over next. And this plus stats in general are important when comparing players from different eras. So like when we were talking in the history series, OPS plus was very important to talk about. So for example, 1908 Hannes Wagner, which we love to talk about, had a 957 OPS. And 1947 Ted Williams, who we also love to talk about, had an 1133 OPS, but they had the exact same OPS plus of 205. So even though their OPS was almost a 200-point difference, compared to the rest of their league, they were the exact same, if that makes sense. And then ERA plus is the exact same idea as OPS plus with ERA. So 1912 Walter Johnson had a 139 ERA. In 1999, Pedro Martinez had a 207 ERA. So, almost 0.8 or 0.7 runs of difference there. But they had the exact same ERA plus of 243, meaning they, were exactly the same compared to their league at the time.
That's right. And, of these league and park adjusted statistics, I think in 95% of cases, more of the emphasis goes on league adjustments. And really the only exceptions in the modern day would be players who play for the Cincinnati Reds and players who play for the Colorado Rockies, because they play in such hitter-friendly ballparks.
Yeah, and that's why, the most relevant, I feel like the most relevant point for OPS plus has been with Larry Walker and Todd Helton. Yep. Because people assume, because they played in these parks, their stats are inflated, but they are inflated, but how much by? They're still, in our opinion, Hall of Fame caliber players because of
that. Has to be the laziest argument that people can make.
Yeah, because we already have
all you need is OPS plus, and
exactly
it debunks the entire argument.
And weighted runs created plus, because that is also park adjusted.
Yeah, so weighted runs created plus it's basically just another OPS plus. It's available on Fangraphs as instead of Baseball Reference, which pertains to OPS plus. It takes the stat runs created, which honestly just think of it as OPS. They're very similar. It has different, it has slightly different park adjustments, and that's why it's never necessarily the same number. But in 98% of cases, a player's, weighted runs created plus and OPS plus are always going to fall within the same, at most 5 points apart.
Yeah,
and that's even that's a stretch.
Unless you're talking about extreme numbers, if you have I think Juan Soto in 2020 had a 217 OPS plus and a 200 weighted runs created plus, but you're not
that's a small sample size.
Almost no one has numbers that high. So and obviously as you go higher or lower, the differences are probably going to increase. But if you have a 102 OPS plus, you're probably going to have a weighted runs created plus between 100 and 104. So and weighted runs created plus also, it uses more runs created, weighted runs created, and wOBA, which are they provide different run values for different situations of how you get on base. We'll get into that a little later with wOBA. We'll explain wOBA a little bit later, actually after this statistic that I'm about to present. Isolated power. So this one, isolated power, is interesting because it's not necessarily a thing of if you have a good ISO, which is how it's referenced on
Or
all these
ISO.
sites.
Yeah.
If you have a good ISO, you're necessarily better than a guy with a lower ISO than you. But a lot of the times it still is. It's kind of interesting. So it's slugging percentage minus batting average. And it basically measures like how much of your production is coming from your power, from your extra base hits. Because if you have a 250 average and a 550 slugging, you can assume that like a lot of your production is based off of home runs and not necessarily like compiling singles and things like that. If you're hitting 350 with a 550 slugging, you can assume it's more based on like singles, doubles, and maybe not exactly home runs. As I'm pulling this graph up, but yeah. So it most of the time. So if you look at the isolated power leaderboards, it's mostly great players. I think Shohei Ohtani led last year.
Chris, you didn't use the golden example, and you don't even know what I'm talking about.
Isolated power.
You're not talking about the true ISO leader.
The true ISO leader. Wait, Mike Zunino?
Mike
Yeah.
Zunino.
Yeah, Mike Zunino.
He was also an anomaly.
He wasn't an anomaly. So yeah. So with isolated power, it's interesting because it's not necessarily completely correlated with offensive success. So I would rather have a guy, you can have a lower slugging percentage but a higher ISO. I'm still taking the guy with the higher slugging percentage, but usually guys with higher slugging percentages have higher ISOs. It's a little complicated. So for example, Adam Duvall had a higher ISO than Aaron Judge, despite trailing him in OPS by 144 points. So Adam Duvall had a 772 OPS. He didn't have a better season than Aaron Judge, even though he had a higher ISO. It's just that more of Duvall's offensive production came from power than Judge's did. And not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just how it is. It's a good measurement of like it's more of a thing for like teams. It's like, do you put this guy in the 1 spot or do you put him in like the 6 or 7 spot? If he has a lower ISO and a higher average, then he's probably going to be more top of the lineup type guy. However, ISO has more of a correlation. It has more of a correlation with runs than average. So yeah, as you look at the graph here, the correlation for average versus runs in 2021 for American League teams is 0.592. With ISO versus runs, the correlation is 0.677. But I wouldn't say this is accurate for all eras. Like if in the 1970s where home runs were not as big, average probably was more valuable to a team success than ISO. It's not necessarily like OPS, but good to note. ISO a higher ISO for American League teams in 2021 contributed to more runs than or correlated to more runs than for batting average.
Can I just talk about Mike Zunino for a second?
Let's talk about Mike Zunino.
So I mentioned him as like the golden example of ISO. He had a 342 ISO in the 2021 season, which led all players with at least 70 plate appearances.
Yeah, and he had like
375.
Yeah, he had a lot.
And the reality is he had a 216 batting average and a 559 slugging percentage. Which essentially means if he wasn't getting a hit often, but when he did, it was home runs every time. Now, Mike Zunino had a BABIP of 231. Now, we mentioned earlier, BABIP means, if you have a low number like that, you're probably getting unlucky. But Mike Zunino is a much different case because Mike Zunino had a 54% fly ball rate in 2021. That led the league by a lot. I think, let me check. Minimum 350 plate appearances. Who is even like the next closest? It was okay. It was his teammate Austin Meadows at 53%, who had a 249 BABIP. The thing with fly balls is that if they're not out of the ballpark, they're probably outs because they hang up for a long time, and with a major league outfield, they're going to get to it almost every time if it hangs up for that long and it's not out. So when you look at Mike Zunino's BABIP, you're essentially looking at his home run to fly ball ratio.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's very true. So also with Mike Zunino, a little hit breakdown for the audience. Mike Zunino, he had 26 singles, 11 doubles, 2 triples, 33 home runs. That is where Mike Zunino's offensive production was coming from. Entirely from home runs. How he got 2 triples also fascinating to me. But
I'm gonna have to check that one.
Yeah.
Illustrator it is.
He's a catcher. I'm not saying because he's particularly slow, but he's a catcher. Catchers don't get triples.
Also, triples are just rare in general.
Yeah, unless you're Benji Molina. Triples king.
Let's see. Okay, well, one of them was off Eduardo Rodriguez, of course. Not to mention, it also had an exit velocity of 86.3. It was probably at Fenway. Yeah, it was at Fenway. So, it hit off. Oh, yeah. Okay, you know what? It was one of those at Fenway that hit, like, in the right field corner, like, where it's just barely fair, where it hits that wall. And it sort of bounced around a little bit. Hunter Renfroe, like, kind of dove towards the stands to try to catch it. He didn't, and it rolled away. So that was one of the 2 triples. That was a pop-up. Or, well, it was a fly ball. The other one was against Dallas Keuchel. And it was... let's see, it was in Tampa. I bet it hit the catwalk. No, it didn't. It was just a misplay. Oh, wait, no, I feel like it had to have, right?
Man.
What? I'm looking at this slow motion replay. The ball takes a weird turn in direction. I don't understand how.
Tropicana Field.
I don't know. It didn't even hit anything. Oh, no, it was just a misplay. It was a misplay and it bounced away. Who was playing center field for the White Sox? Was it Leori Garcia? It looks like it. So it was It was 2 misplays. That's how Mike Zunino gets triples.
Right. And he had okay, I'm doing the math now. So he had 39 non-triples for hits, or 39 non-home runs for hits, 33 home runs. That's very rare. And that is why he had a 430. Wait, what was his
342 ISO?
342 ISO.
559 slugging.
Yeah, 216 average, 559 slugging. But to go back to the point, Shohei Ohtani had a 592 slugging, but a lower ISO. Obviously, you're still going to take the higher slugging. All right. And then wOBA, which we've referenced a little bit before, it applies a run value to unintentional walks, hit by pitches, singles, doubles, triples, and home runs, and creates a new on-base percentage based off these run values. So it basically says, not all hits have the same value like batting average would suggest, and like also on-base percentage would suggest. And even like even with not all hit results have the same run value. Like I believe in the Fangraphs definition, they were like they said, is a double really twice as valuable as a single? Maybe not. So it basically creates these run values. It's very complicated with wOBA. Yes. That's very hard to explain, I will say.
If you wanna look at Ivy League math or what feels like Ivy League math, go Google the formula for wOBA.
It's insane.
Don't even get into SIERA.
The league-wide wOBA is equal to the league-wide on-base percentage is the last thing we'll say. So, a good wOBA would be like having a good wOBA would be, it's the same numbers as having a good on-base percentage. Like a 400 wOBA is excellent, the same way a 400 on-base percentage is excellent. That's a hard one to get through.
I think the perfect way to describe wOBA is that it centers itself around how well you're getting on base comparative to the league average, but also factors in some hitting components, the extra base hits.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then to throw another wrench in the mix, we have xwOBA.
Yeah, if you thought wOBA was complicated, wait till you see expected wOBA. It uses strikeout rate, walk rate, and quality of contact from StatCast batted ball data to determine what a player's wOBA is expected to be. So if you're walking a lot and if you're hitting the ball with very good, a mix of expected batting average and expected slugging percentage, your xwOBA is going to be good. And it applies slightly less for fast players because they tend to hit ground balls more and they can beat out ground balls more. Guys like Nicky Lopez is a good one. Tim Anderson, who we mentioned earlier, very quick.
Yeah, similar to BABIP, where like maybe luck isn't as much of a factor. Like I was looking at Randy Arozarena, and what he did this year. He had like a decently higher wOBA than xwOBA, but then I was looking at like some of his like videos of like some of the singles he got, and he was beating out infield singles. So that's not necessarily.
I think Randy Arozarena was like the only qualified hitter to have a 100 plus weighted runs created plus against ground balls, or on ground balls, I should say.
Yeah, it was.
Let me check this.
Pretty wild to see.
Yeah. Against ground balls in 2021, Randy Arozarena. Yeah, he had a 103 weighted runs created plus, which doesn't sound like much, but it was fourth in the majors.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
The only people above him were Brian De La Cruz on 100 plus less plate appearances, so we're not going to count him. The only players above him were Fernando Tatis Jr. and Trey Turner.
Yeah, that is something. I'm gonna look at the baseball savant. Can sometimes be slow.
I can't believe Fernando Tatis Jr. slugged 424 against ground balls in 132 plate appearances. He had a 338 on base, or he had a 348 average, also a 348 BABIP because it's only batted balls. Balls in play. I can't believe that. That is insane.
Yeah, it is. Randy Arozarena also.
That's got to be like a record now.
Randy Arozarena also among 162 qualifiers was fifth in average against ground balls according to Baseball Savant. He hit 346 on ground balls, and the league average was 241. Trey Turner led the way with 368. Obviously, he's the fastest player in baseball, so it would make a lot of sense.
Yep.
So yeah, that's why sometimes with xwOBA you can't, and BABIP, sometimes you have to factor in like these guys are fast, so they're obviously going to be, have more luck getting on base when the ball is in the fielder's control. All right, and then before we get into defense, we have one more stat to look at.
That's right, and it is. Oh yeah, I put this one in there. Run value. Run value is a relatively new stat. I think it came up in like 2019, I believe. But it is what's called a pitch arsenal stat. So it is used to evaluate. It's for, well, it could be used for hitters too, but it's hitters and pitchers with and or against certain pitches. So instead of saying, Jacob deGrom has a negative 17 run value, you say, in 2021, the exact example was. I gotta wait for this to get pulled up. Jacob deGrom's four-seamer had a negative 15 run value throughout the season. So what run value measures, it is on specific pitches. It determines the amount of runs expected to score based on events. So essentially, every time Jacob deGrom threw his four-seam fastball, based on the results he got, it estimates that he saved 15 runs from scoring throughout the season on his four-seamer. The most anyone saved was Carlos Rodon on his four-seam fastball. He threw it, 58% of the time. So naturally, because run value is a count stat, it accumulates with volume. So when you throw it more, if you have good results, you're gonna have a negative 26 run value, which led the league. The worst in the league.
Makes me wonder what we would be looking at with 2012 R.A. Dickey.
Oh, we can't see that, unfortunately.
Can't see that. It's 3 years before its time.
Yeah, Jake Arrieta's sinker was viewed as the worst pitch by run value in 2021, minus or minimum 10 plate appearances, but it's a count stat, so minimums don't really matter. Which makes sense because sinkers are pitches that are meant to induce ground balls. So if you're not inducing ground balls, you're probably giving up home runs because you're probably
Yes.
hanging it in the zone.
Yeah.
Jake Arrieta's sinker had a 649 slugging against, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But there is also a way to convert this into a count stat, and it's called run value per 100. So it's your run value it's the average run value per 100 pitches. Just looking at the most simple example, Carlos Rodon, the aforementioned Carlos Rodon on his four-seam fastball, he threw 1,302 four-seam fastballs and had a negative 26 run value. So his run value per 100 was -2. It adds up. This is like every other count stat where it's more favorable to smaller sample sizes. So, for example, the best run value per 100 on any pitch, minimum 10 plate appearances, was Dalton Jeffries on his cutter, in which he threw 31 pitches and had 11 plate appearances. So that's it's a small sample size. I'll shrink it down or I'll add it up to 50 plate appearances because that'll be more favorable. But that's the count stat version of run value. And the leader was Jesse
rate stat
yeah,
version.
That's what I meant. Yeah, it's the rate stat version of run value. It was Jesse Chavez's sinker, which
funny.
it had a -9 run value, but it had a -4.7 run value per 100.
Playoff legend.
Yeah, so for every 100 sinkers Jesse Chavez threw, he was averaging about 4.7 runs saved.
Yeah,
and then this can
wild.
also be looked at from a hitting perspective as well. I think the number one was like Vlad Jr. against four-seamers. As far as run value, just the base version of it. Yeah, it was Vladimir Guerrero had a 33 run value against four-seam fastballs, which is where I should preface. If you're a hitter, you want a higher run value, and if you're a pitcher, you want a lower run value. Minimum 50 plate appearances. The best run value per 100 was the aforementioned Adam Duvall, who Chris mentioned in ISO, who had a 7.9 run value per 100 against curveballs. He slugged 882 against them.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is good stuff to know. Good stuff to know.
Yeah. Run value is, like I mentioned, is relatively new. I've been taking a look at it pretty extensively over the last, I'd say, 6 months. And I would encourage anyone to do so because I think it tells a good story and it's pretty consistent with every other result.
Yeah, probably the best evaluator on specific pitches. Like,
really the only one, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you can always go with like average against, slugging against, but run value is the best like thing in terms of accumulation because there's also the idea of you can make it a count stat or a rate stat.
Exactly.
So that's pretty cool. And then so with that we move on to defense, which is the one we're the least sure on in terms of like the three aspects of baseball: pitching, hitting, pitching, hitting. Defense is kind of the least effective in terms of it's the most, at least like it's the most we encourage the eye test for, and it's the least we probably can evaluate sabermetrically, although I still think it's good to look at the statistics. I think they're still mostly pretty accurate. But yeah, we'll get into defense here. Start with defensive wins above replacement.
So dWAR is available on Baseball Reference. It sets the average at 0, which is not similar to regular wins above replacement, which we'll get into later. Chris mentioned we're not really sure about defensive statistics, but what we do know is to not use dWAR. We don't use it. We don't look at it. Especially for catchers, and we'll get into that later. It measures the amount of wins an average player produces from their defense alone. Wins above replacement, that's what the WAR in dWAR stands for, and we'll get more into that later. But the only reason I ever use dWAR is when I'm doing a stat head search on players' careers.
Yeah. So
like
I think
when I'm playing narrative ball.
So
like
I think
Scott Rowland is someone who benefited from it, and he's definitely someone I've used dWAR for.
Yeah, like I think Andrew Jones had like 24 dWAR in his career, so
which is a lot.
So that means that over his career, he had 20. He produced 24 more wins off his defense alone than the average player would have.
Which, I mean, I feel like on defense, there's less opportunities to win games as opposed to offense, which makes sense as far as why it's so hard to accumulate. Because, you know, a 24 dWAR is incredible, but if that was someone's offensive WAR, like, we're probably not even talking about them, you know, as a Hall of
Yeah.
Famer. But, you know, we're talking about Andrew Jones's, I think, 5th year on the ballot now.
Exactly. Like in an average season, the leader in dWAR might have like 2.5. The leader in OWAR is probably gonna have like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
For reference. Yeah, it's definitely easier to stick out on offense than on defense, which I think the statistics show that pretty accurately. So then that advances, and I didn't put the catcher thing in the prep. We rely with catchers, it's better to evaluate on Fangraphs than on Baseball Reference because Fangraphs has a framing effect, which is a large part of defense that Baseball Reference is missing. That's why we choose to evaluate defense on Fangraphs and Baseball Savant for catchers specifically. And you know, there's other aspects that are better than Baseball Reference with defense. Also, we got to get into defensive runs above average, ultimate zone rating, and defensive runs saved. I kind of grouped them together because they all measure the amount of runs saved above the average defender. They all just use different systems. So we had Mark Simon on the podcast who helped develop defensive runs saved. So I'm going to pull his explanation up of defensive runs saved. I feel like it's kind of similar to how they measure ultimate zone rating and other things. They just and defensive runs above average. I think they just use kind of different markers and they probably produce around the same results. So here's Mark Simon explaining defensive runs saved, and I think that this is a good explainer of how things are with defensive metrics outside of StatCast.
So when I was at ESPN, we had an arrangement with this company, Sports Info Solutions. They came and they did a presentation, and it was a pretty persuasive presentation as to why their information was useful and helpful for television purposes. It would allow us to do some things with defense that we hadn't necessarily been doing before. So that was my introduction to it. And then it was just a matter of reading. And you read what UZR is pretty complicated, but defensive run saved, you can pretty much boil it down to like, okay, for each position on the field, there are 4 or 5 traits that I'm looking for quality in that fielder. So I'm just going to measure those 4 or 5 traits for every fielder using the same set of rules and using essentially a system by which we can evaluate batted balls, such as a ground ball hit in the shortstop third base hole, deep in the shortstop third base hole. That's a lot different than the ground ball that's hit right at the shortstop. One is probably an 80% out. The other is more of a 40 or a 50% out. So it's like a 50-50 play. And they came up with a system by which you could separate those and you could establish who were the guys that were good at going after the balls that were deep in the hole, who were the guys that were good at fielding the ball up the middle. So that's kind of the foundation of the stat. And then there are ancillary things like you would want your second baseman to be good at turning double plays. So they calculate for every double play opportunity situation. If a ball is hit to either the first, short, or third, and they go for 2, that's a double play opportunity. And you would say, okay, this second baseman has converted 75% of his double play opportunities, and this second baseman has only converted 55% of his double play opportunities. Chances are the guy that's converting 75% is doing something more right than the guy that's converting 55%. So those are 2 examples. But for catchers, it would be things like throwing arm or framing pitches or blocking pitches. Outfield, it would be throwing arm. It would be things like robbing a home run, cutting a ball off in the gap. If you save a base, saving a base has value. We can put a number on that and we can establish who the guys are that are good at preventing base runners from taking an extra base, like going first to third or second to home, like an Adam Duvall in the World Series, for example, and who are the guys that are poor at it. And it allows you to look at defense in a different way rather than just looking at, as most people look at, errors and fielding percentage.
So Mark Simon explains defensive runs saved better than maybe anybody on the planet could.
Probably
did it very well. And I feel like, I imagine it's a similar system for UZR and defensive runs above average. And also it was funny later on in the interview, I think he said, like, if you think a regular scorebook in baseball is fun, you should look at like the scorebook for defensive runs, or for defensive runs saved, because there's like 50 to 60 different scenarios that they like have to condense into one thing. It's pretty fascinating. Go listen to the episode 159 for the whole interview. Very, very good.
that was a fun one.
The most, yeah, we had the most chemistry with Mark Simon out of anybody we've interviewed. Well, at least out of any strangers we've interviewed. Maybe not like Nico, but not necessarily an interview, but he is a guest, 4-time guest. So yeah, that is defensive runs above average, ultimate zone rating, defensive runs saved, kind of condensed. And then there's outs above average, which has been a new wrench thrown into the defensive evaluation game. This uses StatCast, which, we love so very much. So for outfielders, it uses StatCast catch probability and expected catch percentage versus actual catch percentage to determine how many more outs a player gets above the average outfielder. The one gripe I would have with outfielder outs above average is it does not really consider the arm as much as it doesn't necessarily it doesn't necessarily use the arm, consider a player an outfielder's arm and how they're like getting guys on the bases as much. At least I don't believe that's the case. It seems to be more based on like your range and what balls you're getting to in the outfield. And then for infielders, it is a little more complicated. This is from MLB.com. It evaluates how far the fielder has to go to reach the ball, aka the intercept point, how much time he has to get there, how far he then is from the base runner the runner is heading to, and on force plays, how fast the batter is on average. And it, uses like sprint speed data to measure like if the player should get the out or not. And how good a player is above or below the average defender. Defense can be a little complicated, but the difference between like outs above average and DRS, UZR, and defensive runs above average is it uses StatCast data, like the sprint speed and like how far the player actually moved. With the other ones, it's kind of like it's uses more of the eye test than the actual data, but both are somewhat accurate. Not is not necessarily maybe as accurate as offensive or pitching statistics, because that's more objective. This is a little more subjective, you could say. So yeah, that's defense for the most part. It's probably the most you're going to get out of us. And then we'll get to the more StatCast stats not mentioned. This is stuff we talk about a lot when we talk about players to highlight while the season is going on. So this is important to address.
That's right. So we're going to talk about average exit velocity. I'm sure that's a term you've heard recently. It's literally just how fast you hit the ball off the bat, how fast the ball, comes off the player's bat. Average exit velocity is it's obviously a batted ball statistic. It can only be mentioned, or it can only come up when someone actually hits the ball in play. And in 2021, the average exit velocity was 88.1 miles an hour. The hard hit threshold is 95 miles an hour. Anything over that is considered by StatCast to be a hard hit ball. And the important thing there is that, naturally, the harder you hit the ball, the more likely it is going to be a hit. It's harder for fielders to get to it if it's getting down faster. Obviously, if you're lifting the ball, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and combining that with some high exit velocity, it'll probably be a home run, and it'll probably go for extra bases. Yeah, that's about that. And then launch angle. Launch angle is the angle at which the ball comes off the bat. I've written extensively about
Yeah.
this. Don't let anyone tell you it's ruining baseball. Don't let anyone tell you that it's ruining batter's approach. It's literally just the angle at which the ball comes off the bat. Anything below 10 degrees is usually considered a ground ball. Anything between 10 and 25 degrees is a line drive. Anything between 25 and 50 degrees is a fly ball, and anything above 50 is a pop-up. You never want to be above 50. That's never good for anybody, unless you're the pitcher. That's pretty cool.
Right. Yeah. Like I remember Jamison Tyon was doing pretty well with getting pop-ups for a
Yeah, he
little
was.
bit until he went back
Until he
down to
wasn't.
his usual
Yeah.
performance, I think. Yeah, launch angle is, I think when people talk about launch angle in a negative light, they just think guys are trying to lift the ball more. I think in your article on Diamond Digest, you determined that in the StatCast era, it's always been between 11 and 13. It's
Yeah.
not, which the 11, like that is a low line drive is
Yeah.
what the average launch angle is. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, strikeout rate increases. Maybe there's an argument with that, but also pitchers are getting better.
Yeah, that's literally what it is. It's not that, it's
And-
pitchers.
And fielders are getting better. So like if
Yes.
fielders are getting better. So the idea of putting the ball in play and not, hitting a home run, there's a little less benefit to that. Anyway, that's a rabbit hole to get into. Barrel rate. So first we have to explain what a barrel is, and nothing's going to explain it better than this little diagram we have here from courtesy of MLB.com, who, we would never say anything negatively about, especially in the higher
Especially
ups.
in these times.
Yeah. So here's the diagram, as you can see on YouTube at the channel above replacement radio. So we're looking at the barrel zone. So as you can see, the barrel zone is a little fatter when you're at the like 20s, 25 to like 30 degree launch angle area. It's, way skinnier when you're at the 50 degree mark, because you got to hit at 120 miles per hour. And there's only like one guy in the league that can do that. And it's also very skinny when it's at the 5 degree launch angle thing, because you also have to hit it 120 miles per hour there, which there's only like one guy that can do that. So most barrels are going to be like, 101 miles per hour, 27 degrees. I know the minimum exit velocity required to get a barrel is 98 miles per hour. So anything above that with a certain launch angle can be a barrel. And as you hit the ball harder, the range of launch angle you can have, it gets wider the harder you hit the ball for that to be a barrel, because that means that the ball is the batted ball is much more likely to be a hit as you hit it harder. It's interesting. What we'll say is the average slugging percentage on barrels in 2021 was 25.91, which is that's 2.6 bases per at bat. It's a lot of home runs is what happens with barrels. And the league average barrel rate, in 2021 was 7.9%. These are kind of meant to be rare. And this is percent of batted balls that have, percent of batted balls with a barrel is 7.9%. So, the average player is, less, like 1 out of maybe every 12 times they're going to get a barrel on a batted ball. One out of every 12 times they hit it in fair territory, it's going to be a barrel. That's the average player. So like players with higher barrel rates are going to probably hit more home runs. It's just a good indicator of how well you're hitting the ball. And for pitchers, how well or poorly you are at allowing such things. All right, and then into the holy grail of statistics, wins above replacement. It's been referenced multiple times before on this show particularly, but I mean it's everything. It's everything.
That's right. This is the whole story. So wins above replacement is the estimated amount of wins produced by a player above a replacement level player. This is not the average level player. A replacement level player is not good, essentially.
Yeah.
So there are multiple versions of it, but the two most popular versions of WAR, as we'll be referring it to, are on Baseball Reference, which is considered BWAR or RWAR, for Baseball Reference WAR, or just Reference WAR, the same thing, or Fangraphs WAR, which is FWAR. So position player BWAR uses OPS plus, base running factors, and defensive factors, and position player FWAR uses weighted runs created plus, base running factors, and defensive factors. It all looks the same, but I think the main difference between the two is that Baseball Reference puts a lot more stock into defensive factors, and we've already haven't really been too keen on Baseball Reference's defensive factors, and they do make up a large sample of it. If I had to pick, I would choose FWAR.
Right. Yeah. Like there are just some anomalies that happen with Baseball Reference that aren't as big in Fangraphs. So like I think according to Baseball Reference WAR, Carlos Correa was the best player in the American League, or best position player, like only position player in I think all of baseball. I think he had 7.3 WAR, and I think Soto was below that, Harper was below that.
I mean, technically Ohtani.
Ohtani was above that with pitching, but like in terms of just being a position player, Carlos Correa was the best. I think he wasn't an MVP finalist, and rightfully so. He still was one of the best players in baseball.
I mean, to be fair, Trey Turner also led in F4.
He did lead in F4, but he had, I mean, he's underrated. He had, almost a 30-30 season, but F4, you do it. It is funny you make that realization. I didn't really make that realization that just Baseball Reference will sometimes just way overvalue defense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at like Andrelton Simmons. He was like second in the league in F4 in like 2017. He had like the best dWAR season of all time.
Oh yeah. Second in the league in BWAR. Yeah, he sometimes it can inflate how good a player is defensively. However, Omar Vizquel still only has like 45 BWAR.
Well, that's because his offense just carried him down so much. What was his career OWAR? It was like negative 300, wasn't it?
Or offensive runs above average, yeah.
Well, on Baseball Reference, it's called OWAR.
They're two different stats, but
yeah, it is two different stats. Yeah, no, that one is positive, but it's only 32.9, which is not good considering 24 seasons. And
that's like one per season, or like 1.5 per season, which is not a Hall of Famer. So then where wins above replacement gets a little more tricky is probably with pitchers. So the basis of a pitcher's Baseball Reference WAR is their ERA plus and innings pitched. And the basis of a pitcher's FWAR is their FIP and innings pitched. And I would say Fangraphs values innings more than Baseball Reference, just observationally. So Corbin Burns, as we mentioned many times before, had 5.6 pitcher BWAR and 7.5 pitcher FWAR. That's a pretty big gap there. Usually it is not.
Especially if Fangraphs, you said Fangraphs measures innings more.
Yeah, I believe. I think
it's interesting because
his FIP was that good.
Yeah, because I was gonna say like he didn't, accumulate a lot of innings.
Yeah, I think. Well, I can't imagine what his FWAR would be if he got 200 innings. It would be pretty insane.
Right.
But yeah, his FIP was that good, so it uses FIP and innings pitched a lot. Also, what I've noticed observationally is a pitcher's BWAR can also be affected by the average offensive level of their opponents and how their defense plays behind them. So in 2021, for example, Walker Buehler had more innings and a better ERA plus than Robbie Ray. So you would assume, more innings, ERA, better ERA plus on Baseball Reference, he's going to have a better BWAR. But they had the same BWAR because Ray faced better offenses and had a worse defense behind him. So it kind of creates that effect. Fangraphs doesn't really have that because they value their WAR based on FIP, which doesn't include fielders at all. They might have a thing for the offenses they face. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't dove as deep with that. But that's wins above replacement. It's a lot more tricky with pitchers. I would say position players, whether you look at BWAR or FWAR, it's usually like you're getting a pretty accurate assessment. With pitchers, it can be weird. Like Casey Mize this year had
Wade Miley, right?
Oh yeah, Wade Miley.
Because of ERA plus, because he played in Cincinnati.
Yeah, and Baseball Reference park factors with Cincinnati this year were insane.
I mean, they were everywhere. Like they were insane on Savant too. But yeah, Wade Miley had a 141 ERA plus and a 4.2. Oh no, it's only wins above average and a 5.6 wins above replacement with a 3.37 ERA in literally 163 innings pitched. He just barely qualified.
Yeah, you said he had 5.6 BWAR.
5.6 BWAR with a 3.97 FIP.
He had the exact same pitcher BWAR as Corbin Burns then.
Yeah.
Which,
What was his FWAR?
Wade Miley?
Yeah.
Oh, it had to be like 2.5 or something like that.
I would be willing to bet 2.9.
Yeah, 2.9 compared to
5.6. Yeah.
But even better example there.
That's probably the best example you can get.
And also, I think the Reds defense couldn't have been good.
Eugenio Suarez is like one of the worst fielders in baseball.
Yeah, and I think India was below average, and Winker is not a good defender, and Castellanos.
The Reds defense was definitely bad.
Yeah, so with Fangraphs, they don't really factor that. They just factor your fielding independent pitching, which I think is fair in its own right, because it doesn't factor fielders. And Baseball Reference, you have to factor the fielders because it's based on ERA plus, which can be affected by the fielders
and park factors, like Cincinnati.
And park factors and league factors. All right, so I think that does it for now. We hope if anyone's listening, I hope your mind is not too much in a pretzel right now through a lot. If I were to suggest someone listening, I would suggest listening in like 10-minute increments, because this is
there's a lot to take in.
It's I mean, if I were to listen to a recording of this, like if you were to hand this file over to me when I was like 16, I'd be like, what the heck are these?
Even just like 2 years ago.
Yeah, a lot of it.
Like
2
a
years
run
ago.
value, what?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like 15 months ago, SIERA.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
You're like, oh, I've heard of that. That's like, yeah.
Yeah. It's weird. Well, we're gonna be talking about news next week because
we are.
This
show ran way longer than we thought.
Yeah. Well, we're the 2021 to 22 off season for above replacement radio is quality over quantity.
Yeah.
We're not on a super regular posting schedule or doing like maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, but we're posting. It's going to be like 100 minutes about.
Yeah.
Like
this
today,
was probably 2 hours.
I think we started at like 6, so and it's 7:38.
Oh, maybe no, because I don't know. We'll see.
Well,
I guess.
Wait. Yeah, because you went to charge your phone at like 5:45 or something like that. So maybe it is near 2 hours.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right. Well, I'll see when this recording gets put together. We'll see who's correct here. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and want to watch or want to see, the correlation graphs, the barrel rate or the barrel diagram created by MLB.com, go to the YouTube channel. This is actually one where you probably want to watch on YouTube just to see everything. Go to YouTube. The channel is called Above Replacement Radio. If you want to follow us on social media, follow me on Twitter at Chris_Gianta and follow Daniel on both Twitter and Instagram at Daniel_Curran, and follow the show Instagram at Above Replacement Radio for all the show needs. And we hope to see you next time, whenever that may be, where we will be talking all the happenings or lack thereof in Major League Baseball once again. See you then.
This conversation is over.